Welcome to It's Rainmaking Time. I'm Kim Greenhouse, and I want to thank you for being here tonight. I know many of you are tuning into this broadcast on the World Wide Web, and I want to thank you for not underestimating this glorious medium. You know, I've been producing segments for radio for the last several months on different networks, including the World Wide Web. I've had the privilege of interviewing Dr. Muhammad Yunus, the founder of the Grameen Bank, the founder of Sterling Energy, a new electric power plant for the world that's been in business for 10 years. The owner of StarTech International, who has set up a waste elimination company that can eliminate any and all forms of waste. People in magnetics, in science, in health, in wellness. And usually, I have felt very comfortable interviewing them. I've been prepared, and it's been fun, and it's been easy. But something about the interview with our guest was not easy to prepare for. And I want to tell you why. First of all, you all need to sit down. Do not stand up because you may fall down, as I did many years ago when I met Betty Sue Flowers. Let me tell you a secret about her. Now, some know her as a poet, an editor, an educator, and a business consultant. Others know her as the director of the Lyndon Baines Johnson Presidential Library, or the Kelleher Professor of English at the University of Texas at Austin and Director of Creative Writing. Other people still know her as a member of the Global Business Network, and other people know her as a consultant to NASA, a member of the Envisioning Network for General Motors, the visiting advisor to the Secretary of the Navy, and the writer of global scenarios for Shell International in London and the World Business Council in Geneva. When God told me to think of somebody elegant and divinely guided who's here in service to the world to help take the world to the next level, God told me to get Betty Sue Flowers on right away. Ladies and gentlemen, this woman is the author of Extending the Shade, the co-editor of The Last Word on Power, Reinvention for Leaders for Anyone Who Must Make the Impossible Happen, the co-editor of Daughters and Fathers, the author of Browning and the Modern Tradition, and with Bill Moyers, Genesis, A Living Conversation, Healing in the Mind, and The Power of Myth. I can think of no greater person to invite to It's Rainmaking Time for a celebration of a new story for humanity other than Betty Sue Flowers. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Betty Sue Flowers.
Well, thank you, Kim. It's so good to be here, and what a lovely introduction. I'm in such good company, not least with you and the other guests that you've had on this program. And I really love what you're doing. You put it just the right way, as far as I'm concerned, which is a new story for humanity. And I think that's what we all need. And the wonderful thing about story making is that it's a natural human thing to do, and we're all involved in it. You don't have to be elected President of the United States or be CEO of a corporation to be involved in this greatest of human endeavors, which is creating a new story.
You have done extensive work with Shell International in London to be part of editing and co-working with them for a future scenario. And some people would be very happy to hear about that, and other people would say, "Oh God, why is she working with either a multinational or an oil company, and how could they possibly care about the future?" And I just thought, to set a context for the audience tonight, that you would share about how your work began with Shell and what you did with them.
Well, I'll try to make this short, Kim, but it's a kind of it's an interesting story, because what happens when you ask a deep question of yourself and of the world, and my question was, why is there so much unnecessary suffering caused by the stories people tell about who they are and who they might become? The answer to that question led me deep into the forest of the economic myth. Let me explain a little bit. I think 4 myths have created us in the West. The myth of the hero, the religious myth, and by myth I don't mean something untrue, but just a grand or big story. The democratic or scientific myth, and thank goodness our country was founded during the heyday of that myth. And the myth that we're in now, the economic myth. And when I, as an English professor, ask what can I do to contribute to the world beyond the teaching that I do, one of the things that I saw was that we were telling highly inadequate stories about who we are and who we might become. Knowing that we were within the economic myth, I thought, well, do I have to go back and get another PhD in economics? And fortunately, the opportunity to work with Shell International with a team of 20 mostly economists from all over the world allowed me to learn how to write stories within the economic myth and to get exactly the kind of educational experience I needed to work within the myth which has us all enthralled. It's the first truly global myth because there's no language barrier. It's all about numbers. It's conveyed in numbers and images. So working within this economic myth, no better place to work within a major multinational company which is involved in energy. That's what runs the world, energy of one kind or another, with a team of economists from all over the world. So I felt very privileged to work there. And every oil company, in fact, every major company has to think very seriously about the future. So what better place to be than a place where people are investing billions of dollars in a future 20 years down the road?
When you look at the concept of scenario, could you explain that to people that don't have a context? The actual, what is a scenario? Give us a little piece of the logistics of how does a company or an organization move? First of all, identify what scenario they're in.
Well, scenarios sometimes are misunderstood. That is, the word is used loosely to mean some kind of story about the future. And people will say, well, what's your scenario about what's going to happen in the election? Or what's your scenario about the next 20 years in the world? Whereas actually, the way that I use scenario and the way that it's done at Shell is to create more than one story, at least two, mutually exclusive, although not mirror images of each other, mutually exclusive but equally convincing, if you want to put it that way, stories about the future. And these stories make you, if you're the recipient of the stories, be flexibly oriented towards the future. Most of us think about the future simply by taking the past and misfiling it into the future. We just take the past and do a kind of straight line diagram into the future. But if you have two equally plausible stories about the future, which you hold in your head at the same time, you quit having the story of the future as a prediction and begin holding it as a fiction. And once you hold the story of the future as a fiction, because two equally plausible stories can't both be true, once you hold these stories as a fiction, you're loosened up and you begin to see that most of what we say about reality is a fiction. There are facts, and sometimes we don't have charge over those, but the story we have about the facts, we're totally in charge of telling that story.
It's a recontextualization of conversation. It's the conversation about what we're seeing and experiencing, if you will.
It's the narrative. It's how we put facts together. You know, you can say, well, I was born in such and such place, of such and such parents, with such and such IQ, and you can go on and give all the facts, but what you say about the meaning of those facts is entirely under your control. And most of what happens in the world is a result not of the
actual facts, right,
but the story we tell about the facts.
And of course, the story we're telling now globally in the world, and particularly in the United States of America with regard to terrorist attacks, what it means, that whole scenario. How does somebody like you look at the story we're telling now on the news, inside our own administration, and then privately and publicly to our friends, loved ones, and associates?
Well, for understandable reasons, the story we're telling creates a lot of fear. We're telling a story of hidden enemies all over and who want to do us in, and there's some truth to some of that on one level. And so that creates a lot of fear, and where there is fear, the story of possibility is constricted. So I would like to see us tell a story which opens out a little more, saying, given this situation, what opportunities are here? What opportunities lie within the situation? And we saw that open out soon after 9/11. We saw the opportunity for a new way of being together with other countries in the world. I think we missed that window of opportunity, but it's not to say there aren't other windows there to tell a new story about what needs to happen in the world.
If there was something at this moment that you could transmit to the existing leadership, and by the way, be it any side, Republican or Democrat, but at the moment it's this particular president, and I'm sure it's a sensitive question, but how do you feel you could transmit the value of bringing in a new story, like you did with Shell Oil, to this administration, given the bend and the gravity and severity of the stance?
Well, one of the things that has to be done first, whenever you're talking about large cultural stories is to be very clear about what story we're already in, what story we're telling.